A very good afternoon to you and welcome to Metropol News at 1. My name is Tabitha Mothoni. Now, Kenya's fight against COVID-19 has received a major boost after a consignment of over 350,000 doses of the AstraZeneca vaccine arrived in the country last evening. The much-needed 358,000 jabs were donated by Denmark. This comes at a time when Kenya is battling an acute shortage of COVID-19 doses, with many recipients of the first dose already due for the second shot. Data from the Ministry of Health shows that Kenya has administered 1,187,663 COVID-19 doses, with 192,093 people having received their second dose. At the same time, the country has reported 280 new COVID cases from a sample size of 2,577 tests, with a positivity rate of 8.5%. 343 more patients have recovered, pushing the number of those who have conquered the disease to 119,585. 5 more deaths have been reported, with one occurring in the last 24 hours, while 4 occurred on diverse dates between April and July. Cumulative fatalities have now shot to 3,461. While the World Health Organization is warning that the contagious Delta variant that was first reported in India has now spread to 92 countries around the globe, WHO's technical lead for COVID-19, Maria Van, however, says vaccines remain effective against the variant, especially in terms of helping to prevent severe cases and death. In terms of global trends, WHO Director General Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus says the number of new COVID-19 infections worldwide has been declining for 8 consecutive weeks, while deaths dropping for 7 consecutive weeks. However, the rate of decline has slowed in many regions, and the two numbers remain high.
The rate of decline in most regions has slowed, and every region has countries that are seeing a rapid increase in cases and deaths. In Africa, the number of cases and deaths increased by almost 40% in the past week. And in some countries, the number of deaths tripled or quadrupled.
Now, a school in Nyandarua County that was early last week closed to avert the spread of the COVID-19 will fully be reopened after clearance by health officials. Nyandarua County Commissioner Benson Lepamorijo says Uhuru Primary School that was closed at a precautionary measure has partially reopened, with classes 5 to 7 already in school. The commissioner, who was speaking when he launched a coronavirus awareness campaign to help address the situation, he called on school administrations across the country to ensure full compliance with set coronavirus safety protocols and report suspected cases of COVID-19. The institution was closed last week after 16 pupils and 4 teachers tested positive for the virus.
Kile imekuwa shida ni kwamba watu watimize zile masharti ambayo tumepewa. Wananchi wafae barakoa, si kwa sababu ya kuogopa polisi, wafae barakoa ili kujilinda, na ili kama umeambukizwa usiweze kuambukisha wengine. Shule hiyo ya Uhuru, shule ya msingi ya Uhuru kule Gadhanji, wanafunzi waliweza kuambukizwa ugonjwa huu mbaya. Na nafikiri kufikia wiki iliyopita wale walikuwa wameathirika ni wanafunzi 16 na walimu 4, na wote wameweza kuwekwa kwa ile home based care ili waweze kuugua polepole wakiwa kule nyumbani. Shule pia imefungwa ili kusiwe na usambazaji zaidi. Kukiwa na utulivu, kusipokuwa na usambazaji zaidi ya ugonjwa, basi shule hiyo itafunguliwa. Lakini tulikuwa tumefungua tu as a stop gap measure ili kusiwe na usambazaji ama kusikuwa na maambukizi.
The Kenya Revenue Authority will auction 314 vehicles and 223 containers that are being held at the port of Mombasa over tax tomorrow and Thursday this week. KRA Coast Region Coordinator Joseph Tunoe has described this week's auction as historic. The regional coordinator said the vehicles are being held at various container freight stations, and the containers, which have assorted household items such as clothes and shoes, are being held at the custom warehouse within the port of Mombasa. Tunoe Noi said they have set the two-day auction to adhere to COVID-19 protocols. The clearing will be majorly for containers that have overstayed at the port to ease congestion and encourage efficiency and facilitate trade. KRA expects to raise between 150 and 200 million shillings from the tea auction.
We will have 223 containers which has been placed for auction and 314 motor vehicles. As you can see, these numbers are a bit high. We cannot also be able to run it in a day, bearing in mind that we need to adhere to the COVID-19 protocols. Even as we undertake the auction, we want to assure Kenyans that we need to comply. We will comply with the COVID-19 protocols so that you are safe. You will not be able to contract corona. The process will be very accountable. Every Kenyans will get the chance to take part, and there is equal chance for everybody to bid in the auction and to win. There will be some conditions to be met. There will be some procedure. For those of you who have attended the auction, you know that. And as a media fraternity, I will also invite you to attend the proceedings of the auction on 23rd and 24th. The objectives of our auction basically is to protect revenue. It's a source of our revenue. The goods which we send them for auction are the ones which have not been cleared within the statutory time limit.
President Uhuru Kenyatta is on a two-day official visit to the Kingdom of Belgium and the European Union. Yesterday, President Kenyatta was received by King Felipe at the Royal Palace in Brussels before holding private talks. Kenyatta is also scheduled to meet the President of the European Council, Charles Michel, to discuss Kenya-EU relations and address a Kenya-Belgium Business Forum. Kenya's ambassador to Belgium, Professor Jacob Kimenyi, said Kenya is working on growing its trade with Belgium by addressing barriers such as double taxation and diversifying its exports beyond tea and coffee to include horticultural crops such as mangoes and other tropical fruits.
I represent Kenya in an organization called Organization of African, Caribbean and Pacific States. These are 79 countries. Amongst these countries is the East African region, which has 15 countries, amongst them majority from East Africa. Therefore, it's only fair that it takes or addresses interests that are unique to the Eastern Africa region. The other thing which is very important, as I said, is also here in his capacity as the president in office of the Organization of African, Caribbean and Pacific States. During this visit, he is going to address the Committee of Ambassadors, who are members or represent their respective states. And that is not a mean achievement in that this is going to be almost a few times, I don't know whether to say 3 times, when it has happened in the past.
A showdown is looming within the Kenya Tea Development Agency, with 2 factions laying claim on the leadership of the company. The new board, led by David Ichocho, has sent packing KTDA's long-serving CEO Lerionka Tiampati and 5 other top officials. Ichocho said the 6 top officials have been sent on a 3-month compulsory leave to allow investigations into their conduct. The new board was elected last week during an extraordinary general meeting that was held held by the shareholders and inaugurated by the Agriculture Cabinet Secretary Peter Munya, the outgoing team of the KTDA Holdings Company has since dismissed the changes, saying the meeting was not convened by KTDA Holdings PLC. In a statement from the company secretary's office, the ousted officials have asked the public to ignore any pronouncements and declarations by the new board. According to the statement, the KTDA Holdings PLC board has not been reconstituted and remains in office intact.
All these board members have been, the company of registrar of company have already made the changes over from the previous board to the current board. So we are effectively light in office in accordance with the law. All cases brought by that have been filed by the company or the tea factory company against the crop tea industry regulation of 2020. That is Tea Act of 2020 will be deconstituted with immediate effect. The company will support full implementation of Tea Act 2020 and will no longer pursue avenues that are against the interest of 680,000 small farmers holders. This is the order of the board communicated by the board of directors who are sat behind me.
Kenyans living and working abroad sent home a record high 34 billion shillings in May this year, the highest inflows ever sent in a single month, defying the economic fallout occasioned by the coronavirus pandemic. The inflows were higher by 23.3% compared to 27.8 billion that was received in May last year. In 12 months to May 2021, remittances were increased by 19.5% to 366.5 billion compared to 301.8 in the previous year. All right, and moving on. The Kenya Bankers Associations are this week hosting Inua Biashara Summit for micro, small and medium-sized enterprises. The summit will set the stage for the industry to celebrate the resilience of businesses as the world readies for the International Day of MSMEs. The Inua Biashara Virtual Trade Show is an innovative platform that allows banks to showcase their offering to SMEs in a contactless manner, mindful of the current coronavirus pandemic. Kenya Bankers Association CEO Habil Olaka says banks are working closely with the National Treasury and the Central Bank of Kenya through the National Credit Guarantee Scheme, which seeks to accelerate MSME access to credit during this disruptive pandemic period. The theme of the summit is celebrating SME resilience in turbulent times. Now, Kenya Breweries Limited has launched a reward campaign that will run for 3 months. According to KBL, they have set aside 76 million shillings for the countrywide promotion. Beyond rewarding a nationwide consumer audience, the campaign will not facilitate the upgrade of key retailer outlet upgrades and the same promotion through provision of seats and tables, mugs, jugs and rebranding of their outlets. KBL further says to involve the community, winning campaign elements will be sourced from the specific locality a winner originates from. Now let's look at how the forex market is performing. Nigeria's headline inflation dropped for the second consecutive month in May, but the prices of food have continued to soar. Latest data published by the National Bureau of Statistics indicates that the Consumer Price Index, which measures inflation, increased by 17.93% year-on-year in the fifth month of the year 2021. Let's get more now from CGTN.
After 2 decades of selling foodstuff in the Nigerian capital, Uchenna Obidike is considering closing shop. The trader has been battling low sales and decreased turnover for some time now. The rising cost of food is affecting his business.
I don't know the way they calculated it, but what we are seeing here in the market here, the reality on ground, things are going high every day.
Although Nigeria's inflation rate has declined for the second time this year by a 0.19% margin than the rate recorded in April, prices haven't eased.
I've not noticed anything because most shops I entered, I've not seen maybe I want to buy groundnut. They said it's no more 300, it's 250. Now I've not seen anything like that. Before we used to buy garri 250, mudu, 300, like, you know. But now it's 500. Before I used to use that 500 and buy two and a half mudu.
Economic watchers say the decline is not enough to make any significant impact on the cost of goods.
On the part of government, it could be that we are trying to do something. There is one major factor that is actually driving all of this, even though they are interconnected, which is insecurity. If this government is able, Mr. President in the next couple of days is able to come out and decide to bring together all stakeholders at the sub-national, that's the state, and even at the local government, and put in place a robust roadmap for addressing insecurity in Nigeria, you will automatically see the trickle-down effect on the economy.
The World Bank reports that an estimated 7 million more Nigerians are living below the poverty line, bringing the number to 105 million people within the last 2 years. That's more than half of the country's 200 million strong population. Analysts say if no prompt policies are executed to reverse the trend, many more Nigerians will face increased hardship. After 2 decades of selling foodstuff in the Nigerian capital, Uchenna Obidike is considering closing shop. The trader has been battling low sales and decreased turnover for some time now. The rising cost of food is affecting his business.
I don't know the way they calculated it, but what we are seeing here in the market here, the reality on ground, things are going high every day.
Although Nigeria's inflation rate has declined for the second time this year by a 0.19% margin than the rate recorded in April.
A group of 15 West African countries have adopted a new roadmap to launch a single currency in 2027 after its previous plans were derailed by the coronavirus pandemic. The countries hope a single currency will help to boost trade and economic growth. Leaders of the bloc have also agreed to fight insecurity. Here is that full report from CGTN.
This meeting of West Africa's leaders was a chance to discuss threats to the region's security, political stability and economic development, and terrorism was high on the agenda.
We're still confronted with serious security challenges, with deadly terrorist attacks and kidnappings, not only in the frontline countries, namely Mali, Nigeria, Burkina Faso, and Niger, but also in the coastal countries of our region, such as Côte d'Ivoire. These developments should reinforce our collective commitment to pursue and implement with renewed vigor the decisions taken at our extraordinary summit on terrorism.
While the leaders have agreed to work together to fight insecurity in the region, Ghana hopes to use its position as a non-permanent member of the UN Security Council to also seek support.
Ghana will make sure that Africa's voice is heard loud and clear in the deliberations of the Security Council, both on matters affecting our region and the continent and on global issues. And we will consult broadly to define Africa's interests.
The region's response to COVID-19 and the slow pace of vaccine rollout were also discussed. The West African leaders have also decided to work together to help Nigeria, Senegal and Ghana to start production of their own COVID-19 vaccines. They believe this will help tackle the slump in vaccine supply to the sub-region. On the economic front, ECOWAS has agreed on a new roadmap for the adoption of a single currency, ECO, by 2027. The organization also plans to improve the social and economic development of the region.
15 member countries agreed to have the reform of the ECOWAS institution and to bring the number of commissioners from 15 to 7 commissioners. And I think that was, if there is one thing that we can take out of this summit, is this achievement and important decision that was made by the head of state and government.
Mali was not represented at this ECOWAS summit as the country is still suspended from the organization. The West African leaders say they are monitoring the political situation there closely and want to be assured that the country will follow through with the transitional plan to hold elections early next year and hand over to a civilian government.
Oil prices advanced on Monday, extending the gains they scored in the prior week. The West Texas Intermediate for July delivery added $2.02 to settle at $73.66 a barrel on the New York Mercantile Exchange. Brent crude for August delivery increased $1.39 to close at $74.9 a barrel on the London ICE Futures Exchange. Prices garnered some support from optimism of a demand recovery and a weaker US dollar. The dollar index, which measures the greenback against 6 major peers, decreased 0.36% to 91.8 in late trading on Monday. For the week ending Friday, the West Texas Intermediate rose 1% and Brent gained 1.1% based on the front month contracts. Organizers of the Tokyo Olympics opened the athletics village to the media on Sunday, highlighting environmental protection and epidemic prevention. The once-delayed games is due to start on July 23rd amid concern that the influx of thousands of people from around the world would contribute to the spread of COVID-19. The plaza as the center of the village covers an average of 5,300 square meters and has 19 functional facilities, including a bank and a post office. Athletes will dine alone and maintain social distance to prevent the spread of the virus. A fever clinic and an isolation clinic for those contacts have been set up in the Olympic Village. Athletes with fever will be immediately sent to the fever clinic for testing, with warning signs and disinfectants are everywhere to strengthen epidemic prevention. The Olympic Village will officially open on July 13th. That's your Metropol News at 1. My name is Tabitha Muthoni. Have a good afternoon.
Business doesn't wait. Why should you? Get updated with the latest business news on the go. It's simple. SMS the word news to 20146 and receive breaking news on the go. What are you waiting for? SMS news to 20146 now.
We've seen the foot traffic that happens in a police station. So though, considering that we are facing COVID-19, they need the water reservoirs, they need the water storage, and they actually need the sanitizers for the traffic that is walking in and for even them themselves to protect themselves.
What you have done to us today is an achievement to us as a police officer. The items that you brought us is going to make sure that we keep our environment at the police stations and the post clean. And this is a good achievement.
So today we're donating 12 tanks to 4 counties. As some others are going to be dropped later for the police stations that are really in need. We're also going to be giving soap dispensers and sanitizers to the police stations.
So we are very happy, and God bless you, the Lotto Foundation group.
Thank you for your help. Together, we are changing lives.
This is what you're waking up to in terms of your biggest economic headlines today. Now, the High Court wants the National Treasury to respond to a petition filed by 2 rights activists on grounds that the 2021-2022 national budget was unconstitutional. Justice James Magao on Wednesday directed Treasury, Attorney General and Parliament to respond within 7 days so that the case can be settled for a hearing, with the judge assigning the case to be mentioned on June 29th, 2021. Now, the 2 activists, Okiom Tata and Wanjeri Derry, argue that the budget went off the limit set by Parliament by 608.85 billion shillings, set at 3.023 trillion, adding that it also violates the requirement for development component of the budget, which is supposed to be at least 30% of the total. Now, the activists say that the budget violated the requirement that the deficit should not be more than the development component, arguing that the recommendations of the budget policy statement 2021-2022 was supposed to form the basis for finalization of the national budget under Section 25(8) of the Public Finance Management Act, Public Finance Regulation Act, Section 24(7), and Standing Order, Section 232, Cap 10. Wow. All right. This morning, let's look at the data that we have for you this morning under this specific area, which if you can just put it up. Yes, that's the government recurrent expenditure. You can see exactly where we are from 2015 all the way to 2020, 2021. And indeed, it has been rising. That's the general trend. Albeit that shortfall in 2021, 2021, sort of highlighting the austerity measures that the Treasury was supposed or sort of got into to sort of cap that recurrent expenditure. Let's move on to the next part this morning. Again, in terms of government recurrent expenditure, it can be crossover. Richie, if you can, good. Once we have that data, we shall be giving it to you. Seems like we don't have it again this morning. All right, helping us to go through the major headlines this morning, we are joined by George Menga and Said Shah. George, let me begin with you, sir. Good morning.
Morning, Elijah. Morning. How are you doing?
Happy to have you around, George. We are fine. George, it's not the it's not the first time that we look back and then say that, well, the government budget is unconstitutional. In fact, this is the second time that we have this sort of concern from some members of the economy. What we read into this, George?
Elijah, our budget making process is one of the key components in the 2010 Constitution.
Yes.
And it is captured in the Public Finance Management Act, which clearly states how the budget making process ought to be. It starts from Parliament with the Budget and Appropriations Committee as a committee of the House, in liaison with the Treasury. And during that period, there should be public participation, Elijah. That is what the PFM Act requires. Yes. And by the time it is being read out by the minister, it should have gone through all those processes that the PFM Act envisages. If you look at our 2021-2022 budget, of course, there were loopholes here and there that the activists have pointed out. One is that there is a ceiling, or there is a cap that Parliament puts in place, and that was 3.023 trillion as captured.
Yes.
And then there is the minimum amount that must go into development expenditure, and that must be 30%. But remember, Elijah, I want to look at this as administrative issues rather than constitutional issues.
Yes.
If this was to be the case, then I presume that Treasury would go back to their numbers and just recalibrate or reconfigure their numbers to take into account what the Constitution requires. But that notwithstanding, I think what the activists are raising is genuine concerns that ought to be addressed. As to the validity of this case, I think that we will wait for the courts to tell us. But I don't think that the courts can nullify or can stay such an important aspect of our economy, or such an important activity in our economy as to stay the budget. Maybe they can just recommend what ought to be done in the next cycle of budgeting. But this is a pointer to Treasury, Elijah.
Yes.
That in as much as they want to put up these figures out there, these figures must be in tandem with the 2010 Constitution, and more specifically, the Public Finance Management Act. That has to go down to Treasury very clearly, without any doubt. But I think, as it is today, I don't think the activists have grounds, yes, but I don't think the courts will find it necessary to stay this budget and take us back to a new budget making process. Because remember, the PFM Act also stipulates the time frames for the budget making. It has to be done by the end of month of June, so that we roll over the new budget as we go into the new financial year, Elijah.
Pretty much. So, George, are you saying, just before I bring in a said this morning, are you saying that the budget 2021 and 2022 was not constitutional, or was it constitutional for anybody listening to you?
Largely, it is largely constitutional, Elijah. But according to the PFM Act, there are loopholes, as pointed out by the activists. One is that the development expenditure must be not less than 30%. If you look at our development expenditure, when we were discussing the budget process the last time we were with you, it is around 18% of our total budget expenditure. And then two, that I think is frivolous, Elijah, if you're to ask me.
Yes.
It is Parliament that sets the ceiling on the budget. And remember, the Budgetary and Appropriations Committee work in tandem with now the bigger house to set this ceiling. So if that missed Parliament, then I think that we cannot throw that back to Treasury, but Parliament must deal with that. They can still have a sitting and raise this ceiling to maybe the value that they think is appropriate for this country. But let me just delve further, Elijah. Remember, a bigger chunk or a bigger percentage of our budget is going into our debt financing, and that tells you why we have not allocated so much into development expenditure. So largely, the budget making process, if I was to put it, a bigger percentage is constitutional, but of course there are areas that are pointed out that are unconstitutional and that must be addressed probably now, or if not now, then in the next cycle of our budget making process.
Pretty much. Sid, let me bring you in on that as well. I mean, Sid, they mention very critical points. They say that the activists say that the budget violated the requirement that the deficit should not be more than the recommendations of the budget policy statement for 2021-2022. And that is pursuant to Section 25, Cap 8 of the Public Finance Management Act and the Public Finance Regulation 27, Cap 4 and Standing Order 232, Cap 10. They have a point. They have a point. So, Sid, constitutional and constitutional.
Morning, Simba. Thanks for hosting the show. It's been a while since I've been on. Let me tackle your question from the laws you've just quoted.
Yes.
Let's see what Section 25 of the Public Finance Management Act provides for. It clearly states that the National Treasury is supposed to prepare and submit first to the Cabinet the budget policy statement for approval. Once the budget statement policy has been approved by Cabinet, it's tabled in Parliament, and this is supposed to be done by the 15th of February each year. In the budget policy statement, Section 25 provides that the National Treasury is supposed to include a statement on the proposed expenditure limit, limited for national government, including those of the Parliament and Judiciary. And this is where the whole controversy the act of this application is premised on. It goes on to also state that Parliament is within 14 days of the budget policy statement being tabled in Parliament. Parliament is required to discuss a report containing its recommendations, and they either pass a resolution to adopt the budget policy statement with or without proposed amendments. And then it goes on to finally provide that the Cabinet Secretary should take into account the resolutions passed by Parliament in finalizing the budget. If we go on to see what the Public Finance Management Regulations provide for, Regulation 27 provides that once the budget policy statement is adopted by Parliament, it's supposed to serve as the basis of expenditure ceilings specified within that fiscal framework and relevant for that financial year. So if we look at this, just based off the law, there is argument that there's some certain provisions of the Public Finance Management Act and the steps involved in creating, formulating, and passing the budget have not been followed. However, Section 16 also of the Public Finance Management Act provides to the national government, upon seeking approval of Parliament, to deviate from any financial objectives set in a budget policy statement. And this can only be done in situations where there's this temporary deviation can only be done in situations where it's necessitated by a major natural disaster or any other unforeseen, significant unforeseen event.
Yes.
So one could easily argue that the National Treasury does have a defense to justify its basis of deviating from the expenditure limits set in the budget policy statement. But on the issue of constitutionality or unconstitutionality of the budget, Simba, unfortunately, I'll have to reserve my comments. It's a matter in court, and let's wait for the 29th of this month, when the High Court is going to be hearing the petition.
Pretty much.
Let's not predict what votes are going to say, but let's keep back and wait. And I agree with what George had said.
Yes.
Even if there's been a violation of the law, it's highly unlikely for the court to stop this F21, F22 budget from proceeding.
Yes.
Just based on what we've seen previous judgments on budget, but for example, if you would allow me just to use the example of the recent ruling whereby cabinet secretaries and permanent CASs were deemed to be unconstitutional in office, and court went ahead and actually gave it that they stayed to their own ruling until such a time when COVID-19 would be no longer an issue in our country. So just based on how the judiciary has interpreted previous major constitutional issues, it is unlikely for the F21-22 budget to proceed.
Yes. George, let's go back to exactly what they did. Again, it was in last year's budget as well, where there was a lot of conversation about the budget making process, which a lot of people said was not really that constitutional. George, I mean, we are at a position, and I'm not talking about now this case that is in court, because we should not preempt on exactly what they're going to do. The powers of the court in making sure that the budget making process is actually constitutional. Can it be reversed? Not essentially saying go back and start again, but can it be reversed? And George, I want you to speak from this perspective of us going beyond what the Budget Policy Committee is recommending to Treasury to do. Yes, there are sections within that as well that provide for us to sort of go beyond what they're recommending. But how unprecedented were those conditions, George? We knew them when we're starting the process in February.
Budget making process is very sensitive, as it were.
Yes.
And in fact, even the framers of our constitution, especially on the Public Finance Management Act section, had envisaged this, that our budget making process is one of the key components in our governance. And that is why they put limitations, so they put recommendations on what ought to be considered in the budget making process.
Yes.
But still, again, Elijah, if you read the entire PFM Act, as it were, you realize that the framers of the Constitution knew that budgets are dynamic. There are things that will happen this year that you had not foreseen last year. Yes. An example is the COVID-19 pandemic that came in last year. If you are doing, say, a blueprint, like for example the Vision 2030, then you realize that there are things that you might not have foreseen in your forecasting that are realities today. Yes. That is why the PFM Act gives leeway to Parliament to make these legislations to support the current situation as it were. So on this one, Elijah, I would want to push it back to Parliament.
Yes.
That maybe the Budget and Appropriation Committee is the one to be tasked with ensuring that our budget reflects our current situation as it is, but still abides by the Constitution. That's the PFM Act.
Yes,
the
George,
PFM Act is not very rigid, Elijah.
Yes, George, I'm sorry to cut you short, and I don't mean to this morning, but when you look at exactly what we made this budget, George, was it not under the COVID-19 pandemic? And these recommendations from the Budget Policy and Appropriations Committee, they were within the COVID-19 pandemic. So we knew very well on exactly what we had to do.
That is what I'm telling you, that this one has the bat lies with Parliament as it is, yes. And then with Treasury. That's what I'm trying to put.
Yes.
That Budgetary and Appropriations Committee probably did not interrogate some of these numbers and relay back the message to Treasury, so that they can harmonize whatever figures that Treasury had to align with the PFM Act, yes. But also taking into account the current situation as it were, and also our debt financing. Remember, Elijah, in discussing the budget, we discussed this all the way from 2019, that our fiscal policies were not aligned to our current economic situations, and then our debt proposition.
Yes.
Our biggest challenge as it is today, Elijah, is our debt levels or our debt portfolio. That is our biggest challenge. Remember, a bigger percentage of our finances or our revenues are going into debt financing. In fact, COVID-19 wouldn't have come at a worse time than the time it came. So I would still want to go back to Parliament and ask Budget Stability Committee to just relook at their figures, maybe in the next budgetary cycle.
Yes.
I want to agree with you that maybe courts will not find it necessary to overturn this budget as it were today, because if you do that, then basically you're telling government to shut down and wait for this process to be restarted. So I don't foresee a situation where the courts might put a stay on this budget. But that notwithstanding, I think the next budgetary cycle, the Parliament needs to sit down with the Treasury and just ensure that our budget reflects our current economic situations, but also must abide by the PFM Act and the 2010 Constitution, as it were.
Pretty much. Now, gentlemen, let's move on to the next one this morning. Now, the World Bank Group is now mulling removing Kenya from countries with a high risk of defaults on loans in 2028 if the authorities can implement and strictly follow a program aimed at curtailing growth in government expenditure and punitive taxes. Now, the lender now says that it is optimistic that the country's debt risk profile will improve in coming years on economic growth and exports, helped by fiscal consolidation program and implementation of policy reforms. Now, the World Bank and International Monetary Fund, in the latest debt sustainability analysis DSA report in April, upheld Kenya's classification among its countries with high risk of debt distress. Let's look at that situation there for this morning with the data that we have for you, just to show you exactly where we are in terms of that. And you can actually see that Kenya's outstanding debt from IDA and IFAD, it has been rising despite their concern that we are a high risk debt country. Let's move on to where we are again on the next data set for you this morning, where we have Kenya's public debt. That's a known story, always rising, and we seem not to have a cap or contain it as well, despite the song and the preaching from the National Treasury as well. Let's cross over to the next data set that we have for you this morning. External debt as well, all the way up to where we are in January 2021, has been rising as well, sort of tallying with where we are in that Kenya's domestic debt as well, all the way to Q1 of 2021, always and has been on a rising trend. Sid, that should we implement reforms that would curtail national expenditure and reduction of taxes, then we could be out of those countries considered as high risk when it comes to debt. Now, for the question is, should the World Bank consider removing the country from high risk debt countries?
Yeah, Simba, before I answer that, let's just understand why we were put into that high risk benchmark.
Yes.
And this happened last year, May 2020.
Yes.
And the reason World Bank reclassified us from a moderate rating to a higher rating was, because on the onset of COVID-19 containing measures the government had implemented, which generally hurt the economic activities in our country. Tax cuts led to depressed tax collections. Exports were cut significantly just because generally, for example, in the agricultural sector, European countries, many of the first world countries, implementing measures to cut their imports, agricultural produce. We've had a delayed implementation of a fiscal consolidation program since a bit earlier than the COVID-19 pandemic. And all of this really led to a situation where I think World Bank reclassified their Kenya's rating from medium to high. And if we look at it now from a situation where we are in today in 2021, there is reason for us to be optimistic because our economy is on a bounce back. I mean, put it in those terms. World Bank has also predicted that our projected economic growth, our exports, and the fiscal consolidation program implemented as a result of the IMF and the World Bank program, this is going to lead to a spur in economic growth. And as a result of that, there is likeliness for us to be removed from that high rating to a more moderate rating. If you look at the on a year-on-year basis,
yes,
output growth from last year, the second quarter of last year was at negative 5.5%. But if you look at the last quarter of 2020, it dropped down to negative 1.1%. But there is significant signs of economic growth. I mean, our economy is reopening. We are getting to a point where tourism levels are obviously not going to be the same for a long time, but the tourism industry is reopened. So in terms of we should be optimistic enough to and hope for this economic growth to carry on in the right direction.
Yes.
And then when you look at this whole IMF World Bank program and the pressure that they've put on our national government to really cut down on their national expenditures, and one of the conditions of the grant was that that we were to